Good morning. Welcome you out this morning. Morning of February 7th. The world keeps going faster and faster. I'm happy to be here. Happy my daughter and my wife are back. They both came out relatively unscathed from everything, and both are feeling well. So thank you for your prayers in that regard. So we're going to continue on in our study of Revelation by being in Daniel. I know this last week we were talking about Daniel's 70th week and talking about the times and what those mean. Last week, this week, me and my dad were out, and he was like, maybe you can make something that make it a little more clear, try to just kind of lay it out. So hopefully this, I made this quickly this morning, just to kind of explain the times and make it really simple to understand, just because it can get hard to follow. It can be difficult to understand it, some things, just because it's not that it's not clear, it's just there's a lot of information and a lot of numbers and a lot of words and a lot of things you have to understand in the Hebrew. Is it big enough? Can people read it? Does it need to be bigger? Is that perfectly fine? Okay, I just want to make sure that it's able to, I think I could zoom in even more if I needed to. So we're coming up, and this is a pivot on Revelation chapter 11, where we've started seeing the mention of the days. Specifically, it's the 1,260 days, and we're seeing the pivot of saying, oh, okay, what do these times mean, and what is this fulfillment of? This is, again, something me and my dad were talking about. So that's why my dad can say the boat is used for Bible study, so we can go and talk about these things. But we go and we see these. We talked about this aspect of how it's become more increasingly clear that Revelation is for Israel. Revelation is for God's people. Revelation is to the Israelites. This is the culmination of a combination of their past and to where their future is, and to what's happening, to what's going on. These are going to be things that when it was rooted in their history, they would understand these references. This would be second nature. They were taught to read and learned and read and wrote these books, and were brought up knowing their history extensively. So these things that seem like obscure references to me and you are just ingrained in their memory and their historical significance. Just a real quick aside, one of the interesting things that I said I might bring up, but how a lot of people say, well, that there's some people who'd say that Revelation's for the church, and it's not necessarily true. There's applications, but there's, chapter 2 and part of, I believe, chapter 3 is for the church, and then it moves on, which is the pause before the end or the beginning of the 70th week of Daniel. The church age is that pause, right? And it's a very, if you take a step back and even look at how Revelation is written, the first 3 chapters are completely unlike the rest of it. It's a straight up, this is what God's saying to the churches. And then it stops and says, and then he has a different vision. This is for the Israelites now. So he includes the church, but now he pivots and says, okay, this is the culmination of the ending of Israel. It's very interesting. I could talk more about it, but it's not necessarily my peer view. I just thought it was interesting to say just, how it, it kind of stops, focus on the church, and then the rest of Revelation is for Israel. It's basically just like that. Yes, Don?
So the 483 years, or the 69 weeks, when that stops, the pause we're in now is the church age, and then the 7 years will start back up.
Yes. Or the last 7 years. Yeah, and I'm just about to go through these as well and kind of hit on it again real quick. So we're in Daniel chapter 9, specifically the last part of Daniel chapter 9. Just a quick recap of Daniel chapter 9 so far. It's Daniel reading Jeremiah, reading things of Jeremiah, understanding where he is, what the Israelites are doing and who they are. He immediately falls on his knees and starts praying for deliverance, starts praying for mercy, starts praying for, I need to we need to fall on our knees and accept what's coming to us. And he's praying for understanding, and then Gabriel comes and says, I'm going to tell you what it means. And basically the short answer is no, you're not getting deliverance. But because of your position and what you're asking for, because you're being honest and you're being open and you're being very where you should be in front of God, he's like, I'm going to give you more information. Which again, that could be a whole study in and of its own, that Daniel's on his knees asking for something and praying and saying that this is where we are as a people, and I'm praying for mercy. And he's in the right head, but he's in the right headspace, but he's asking for the wrong things. So God gives him more information. Because of his position and where he's leading, he's asking the right questions. He's putting himself in the right position. God doesn't answer his request, but he does answer his prayer. He does say, hey, I'm going to tell you what's going on, even more information than you asked for. And you could take that a whole lot of different ways, and again, it's not necessarily my purview to get into that today, but it's a great study and something that could benefit you guys in your own right, going in and studying yourself of how many times did people pray and ask for something and they got completely something different than what they asked for, just because they were in the right mind, just because they were in the right place, they were asking the right questions, so God gave them more light. It's an interesting study for sure. So we're going over the end of Daniel chapter 9, specifically in verses 24 through 27. He's giving them the timeline, so we'll read that real quick. In Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 27, it says, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city, to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Again, these are the things that are to be accomplished in that the 490 years, or the 70 weeks. This is what's going to happen, is all these things: finish the transgression, end of sins, reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem under the Messiah, the prince shall be 7 weeks, and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself, and of the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause a sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even unto the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. So we see the times, and this is where I'll go back to this to try to see if this makes it a little more clear. That outline is a great outline for Town Bible Church, but I kind of wanted to just go through the verses, and that's what my to just go through the verses and see what the years are. So if we understand that in the Hebrew, in this passage, weeks mean sevens. That's kind of a fundamental basic understanding of this. Weeks equals sevens in this time. So when it says in 9:24, it says 70 weeks, it means 70 sevens. And so that's what I mean right here. 70 sevens is what's come upon them. That there are 77. So if you do the math, which I did it for you so you guys don't have to get out your calculator, 70 times 7 equals 490 years, or 70 weeks in Daniel. So 490 years and 70 weeks of that. Again, just a quick aside, I do like the parallel. When's the last time you heard the 490 years? When's another time you can think you've heard about that in Scripture? Peter asking for forgiveness. I don't think that that's a coincidence. I think that that's a very pointed reference to this portion of Scripture. I really do. When should you forgive someone? Until the completeness of time. That's what that means. Not just literal 490 years. It's him saying, until I come again and set up my kingdom. That's the extent of what he's saying. So I found that to be really interesting and a great study as well. That 70 times 7 is again a thing that to me and you is math, but to the Jewish or the Israelite person means, oh, I know exactly what he's talking about. This is Daniel. He's saying 70 times 7. This is specifically pointing to this. This is until the fulfillment of Scripture. Should I forgive somebody? Which is, I think, a very interesting study or something that you guys can look up again. But I just thought I'd like to bring that aside up. So in Daniel chapter 9, verse 25, it says, now the 7 weeks. So now it starts dividing these into 2 separate divisions in 25. It says, or 3 separate divisions in 25 and 27. It says 7 weeks. And then so that we know that that's 7 sevens, so that's 49 years. And that's estimated about how long it took for the temple to be built. And it mentions that here. In verse 25, so the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks. So we see that 49 years is how long it built the temple. And then it says in 62 weeks, score is 20. 3 of those would be 60. And then 2 would be 2. Hopefully that's not too hard. So 62 weeks, or 62 sevens. So you have 62 times 7 is 434 years. So if you times these two together, 434 and 49 gives you 483 years after that. So that's the time you get to is that precipice of now there's 483 years that have been accomplished from the 60 and 2 weeks and the 49 from the rebuilding of the temple. Then we get to verse 27 and it says confirming the covenant for 1 week. So this would 483 is, does anybody know if you divide that by I did forget that part of the math. How many weeks is this according to?
It's 69 weeks.
69 weeks, 69 sevens. 69 times 7 is 483 years. So 62 plus 7 here. Sorry, I did forget to put that one in. That one's an important one. It's 69 weeks. So knowing that that's what you're getting. So we're getting to the culmination of the 70th week of Daniel, the 70th 7-year period, which mentions in verse 27, if confirming the covenant with many for 1 week, or 1 7, or 1 period of 7 years. So we know that the 483 that we've already had, plus the 7 mentioned in Daniel chapter 9, verse 27, is 490 years, or a culmination of 70 weeks. So the whole math in here, verses 24, which says there's 70 weeks here, to now do the math, which mentions coming up to 70 weeks here. Does that make it a little better to understand? Did that seem a little more clear? I wanted to try to just lay out verse by verse what the weeks were so that I understand that sometimes I think I'm being understood, but I'm just saying words that I have studied for a couple, weeks, and I want to make sure that those are reciprocated in you guys. Send you this. It's just a quick Word document. I can also send that to you or email it to you or anything like that. It's super easy to send in those things. So the 70th week, or the 70 weeks that are to occur, leads up to the I believe the birth of Christ, or essentially him coming to trying to be part of his kingdom. Sorry for the scrolling here. I was trying to scroll my computer. Yes, Dawn.
In verse 27, you shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. That's the last week. And then in the midst of the week, that's the 3.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Then the sacrifices will stop.
So we see even the separation of the 3.5 years here in verse 27 as well. the overspreading of abominations and make it desolate, even to the consummation, and determined shall be poured for the desolate. So we can see here what the purpose of the 70th week of Daniel was supposed to be. This, what the perfect will is in verse 24. The perfect will of God is in verse 24 for the Israelites. I hope that that's easy to see. This is what was supposed to happen, and that's the 69th to 70th week. There was supposed to be no pause. There was supposed to be just into Jubilee, right? At the end of the 49th into the 50th year, we talked about that you have the year of Jubilee, and you're understanding, like, this is supposed to be a beautiful thing. You know, verse 24 was supposed to be what's happened, is this is to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, a reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Right? And that will happen. That's going to happen. We're going to see in Revelation that this is going to be confirmed. But I believe, in the perfect will, there was supposed to be no pause. There was supposed to be the Israelites would accept Christ as king. He'd come down, set up his kingdom, and the 70th week would have happened already. And it would have been, hey, we've confirmed you did all these things. There's reconciliation, there's the everlasting righteousness, but it didn't happen. And so now we get to the point where he's like, well, we'll give the Gentiles a chance. And that's where the 69th week in the pause happens, and we're waiting for the 70th week to begin, the 70th period of 7 years, or this last 7 years to occur of the tribulation period. We're waiting for that to happen, which, again, I believe starts with the rapture, and we've already seen, I believe, in Revelation chapter 6, if I'm not mistaken, where he starts up with the come up hither, or I think it might be 4, with the come up hither. I want to make sure I get my sometimes it's hard to keep everything in place. I didn't make I'm a very free-form kind of writer, which is in my detriment in the future when I want to go back and reference something. I'm like, I have front and back of papers sort of things. So we see that the confirmation of the 70th weeks, and this is what it means to us and to Israel, is it's supposed to bring out a whole bunch of beauty, but we see that he says this is what should have happened, and now we see what is going to happen at the end of the 70th week. He said, confirming the covenant for 1 week. In the midst of the week he shall cause sacrifice of the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate. Even in the consummation is determined shall be poured upon the desolate. And these are the things that we have been seeing of the terrible things happening to humanity, the things that are being put upon them, the definite, like the plagues and things that we have been seeing so far are these confirmations of saying, you know, I'm going to make sure that they understand. So last week I left you with a chart. Real quick, want to make sure. Did this make it a little bit easier or no? And that's, if no's okay answer too. But I wanted to make sure that we could follow the times in each of the verses so that we can understand where the 70th week comes from, because it's going to be something we're going to mention, and we're getting into the culmination of it in Revelation for sure. We're going to be talking about what's happening in the period of 7 years, and what that means for our future, or the world's future, I guess I say. Our future, if you're saved, is going to be taken up and not going to be part of it. So we see what the world's future is, and what the Israelites' future is, and what they're going to be. We're going to see a lot of them destroyed. We've seen a lot of men destroyed already. Dad, you had a comment?
The verse 27 is alluding to the abomination of desolation, and it's saying that in the midst of the 7 weeks, 3.5 years in, the Antichrist will actually sit in Jerusalem, in the temple, and call himself God, and essentially Israel will acknowledge the Antichrist as God. So that's Matthew 24.
It correlates with that as well as, I believe it correlates with the, I personally believe it's happening at the same time of the, when the prophets are there, that first 3.5 years. We'll see that because I left you guys with a question that I don't expect you to know the answer to, but the 1,260 days we see is a period of the first 3.5 years where they get killed. The Antichrist kills them, and I think that's the culmination of him coming to the throne, if that's what you agree with. So, my question I left with you last week is we see that there's mentions of times, time, and times, and we'll get there when we go to Revelation chapter 12. We will be referencing Daniel in Revelation as well. I only have a couple minutes left, but in Revelation chapter 11, in Revelation chapter 11, verse 3, it mentions the two witnesses here, and again, I'm not going to conjecture who the two witnesses are, but we see that they have power, and they prophesy 1,260 days. We see that's very specific. 1,360 days. And then in Daniel chapter 12, which we haven't really got to, but it does mention in Daniel chapter 12, verse 11, and I think it's actually a pretty easy answer. It's an interesting ending to the book of Daniel, by the way. And it says in Daniel chapter 12, verse 11, it says, "And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days." So we see 1,290 days in Daniel, and 1,260 days in Revelation. So I'm going to put in big air quotes because if people just listen to me in the background on YouTube or anything like that. What is the discrepancy? Why is there a 30 days error? I don't want to put that in big quotation marks. This is not a thing. Does anybody have a conjecture at the answer? I'm going to defer to my mother first real quick, Dawn. Let's see. Very possible. I believe that could be, I actually have more than one answer, but that's very, very possible that it could be the difference between the Jewish and the Roman calendars. Just the timing of it, that the Jewish year is 360 days, and our normal Roman is 365 days, or 364, depending on the leap year and sort of things like that. So it's very possible it could just be the timings. I have another one that I lean towards, but you could be right. You're not wrong, but you could be right. Yes, Dawn, what were you going to say?
Time of Christ ministry
I
think it's 33 years.
I don't understand.
Well, like Christ's lifetime, was there allowance made for the time he lived on earth?
I believe these are literal days. I don't think the extra 30 is for years. These are literal days because they refer to 3.5 years, or right around then. So for you, Dawn, no, but that's okay. It was a good. Hey, it's not an easy answer. It's not a one thing that just strikes out to you, but I think it's something that's explained by just reading. Honestly, it gives a specific reason for why it's more. In verse 11, it says why, which is very interesting. It says, "And from the time that the daily," it tells you specific times, "from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days." So there's a 30 days extra that says from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away. I don't know when that is specifically or why that's taken away, but it tells you that's from the time that the sacrifice is taken away. And then we say in Revelation chapter 3, it says they come in and start prophesying 1,260 days close in sackcloth. So I think personally that there's a month from the time that the sacrifice is taken away, from the time in which the temple is rebuilt. And I personally believe, and this is kind of how I've come to terms with it, is that the temple is built, but for the first month that the temple is built, they say, but we're not going to sacrifice in it. We're not going to do anything in it because it could offend the people around us. We're not going to do anything for our own history. We're not going to do anything that might upset anybody who shares the land, because remember at the beginning of Revelation chapter 11, there's the people are in the Gentiles are in the court, which if you even remember, if we went back a little bit more, we know that the rock of the shrine, the dome of the rock of the shrine sits in the court where the temple should be. I personally believe they will not allow sacrifices to happen there to keep the peace. They're going to build the temple to not do the effects of the temple. They're not going to do any of these things. They're going to say no religious ceremonies are going to happen here. So I just think it's two different times. It's of the same time, but there's just an extra 30 days that are allowed there, saying there's going to be something that happens. This is something something you don't find anywhere else, is the end of the daily sacrifice shall be taken away. That's not mentioned anywhere else, but it doesn't mean that it's not in conclusion with what's going on or in a perfect marriage to the time schedule. I think it's just telling you a little bit more of what's happening there. And the abomination of desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. And we see this, they're just describing different parts of this time period. That's what I personally believe. I think it's an easy explanation because it's just telling you a little bit more, saying that there's a time when the sacrifice will be taken away. And I think there's that 30-year period of them, the 30-day period, sorry, not 30-year period, 30-day period of them saying, we're going to not do this, and then the prophets show up and they prophesy for that many days. You could even say that they show up at the same time and there's an extra 30 days after where things are happening and then they happen. So I think it's not a discrepancy. I think it's just an explanation of a little bit different times or a little bit extra insight into what's happening. That's my personal thought about it. Again, I could be very wrong, but I would like to hear you guys what you think. But I think that's the easiest and the easiest explanation to me is usually the best one. But I'd like to hear what you guys think of it probably next week because I have to close quickly. Greg, if you don't mind closing us in prayer this morning.